Dr. Michael Rodriguez was at the peak of his career when the world collapsed around him. At 42 years old, he was one of Houston's most respected neurosurgeons, with hands steady as rocks and an impeccable reputation. He had spent 20 years saving lives, operating on brains with an artist's precision and the confidence of someone who had never failed when it truly mattered. It was a Thursday in September when everything began. Michael was in the middle of a complex surgery to remove a brain tumor from an 8-year-old girl when his right hand began to tremble. Imperceptibly at first, just an almost invisible vibration. But for someone whose life depended on absolute hand stability, it was like an earthquake. "Dr. Rodriguez?" the head nurse asked, noticing he had paused. "Sir, is everything okay?" Michael looked at his hand, which was now visibly trembling, holding the scalpel. Sweat began to form on his forehead, not from the heat of the operating room, but from pure terror spreading through his veins. "Dr. Patterson," he called his assistant, trying to keep his voice steady. "Take over from here. I need a break." He left the operating room staggering, leaving his team confused and worried. In the corridor, Michael leaned against the wall, watching his hands shake uncontrollably. It was as if his own body was rebelling against him, betraying everything he was, everything he had built. In the following days, the tremor worsened. It wasn't just in moments of stress, it was constant, relentless. Michael tried to hide it from everyone, especially from his wife Elena and their 15-year-old twin children, Carlos and Sofia. He cancelled surgeries, claiming personal problems. He took medical leave, saying he needed a vacation. But there was no hiding it for long. "Michael, what's happening to you?" Elena asked one morning, finding him in the kitchen unsuccessfully trying to hold a coffee cup. The liquid splashed with each tremor, staining his white shirt. "You've been shaking for weeks." "I'm fine," he lied, placing the cup back on the counter with more force than necessary. "I'm just tired." "You're not fine." "Look at your hands, Michael." Carlos and Sofia entered the kitchen at that moment, stopping abruptly upon seeing the tension between their parents. "Dad," Sofia asked hesitantly, "your hands, why are they shaking?" Michael looked at his children, these beautiful and brilliant teenagers who saw him as a superhero, as the man who saved lives every day. How could he explain that the superhero was broken? "It's nothing, Princess." "Daddy's just a little nervous." But it wasn't nervousness, and Michael knew it. After weeks of avoiding reality, he finally made an appointment with Dr. James Harrison, the best neurologist he knew. The tests were extensive and humiliating. MRIs, blood tests, neurological examinations. Michael, who was used to being the doctor, was now just another scared patient waiting for answers he didn't want to hear. "Michael, Doctor," Harrison said when they finally sat in his office, "I need to be direct with you." Michael's heart stopped. 20 years as a doctor had taught him that when a colleague started a conversation like this, the news wasn't good. "You have Parkinson's, early onset Parkinson's." The words hit Michael like a hammer. Parkinson's. The disease that stole movement, coordination, independence. The disease that turned surgeons into invalids. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice coming out as a whisper. "Unfortunately, yes. The symptoms, the tests, everything points to Parkinson's. You're probably in the early stages, but my career is over," Michael completed. Dr. Harrison nodded sadly. "Surgery will no longer be possible. The tremors will worsen. Eventually, other motor functions will be affected." Michael stood abruptly from the chair, walking to the office window. Outside, Houston continued its normal life. Cars passed. People walked on sidewalks. The world kept spinning as if his hadn't just stopped completely. "How much time do I have?" he asked. "Michael, Parkinson's isn't a death sentence. With proper treatment, you can live for decades. How much time until I can no longer take care of myself?" Dr. Harrison hesitated. "It's hard to say. It varies greatly from person to person. Some patients maintain good functionality for 10, 15 years. Others progress more rapidly." Michael went home in a state of shock. He sat in his car in the garage for an hour, unable to face his family. How would he tell Elena that the future they had planned together, comfortable retirement, travel, watching their children graduate and marry, all of this was now in question? How would he tell Carlos and Sofia that their father, the strong man they admired, was sick? When he finally entered the house, he found Elena preparing dinner, humming softly. She turned and smiled when she saw him, but the smile disappeared immediately upon seeing his expression. "Michael, what happened? How was the doctor?" He collapsed in the kitchen table chair, placing his head in his trembling hands. "It's Parkinson's, Elena. I have Parkinson's." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael heard Elena's spoon fall to the floor, heard her breathing accelerate. "What? What does that mean?" she whispered. "It means my career is over. It means I'll progressively get worse. It means our life as we know it is over." Elena sat beside him, taking his trembling hands in hers. "Michael, we'll face this together." "How? How will we face this? I'm a neurosurgeon who can no longer operate. I'm a man who in a few years won't be able to tie his own shoes. You're my husband. You're our children's father. You're more than your profession." "No, Eleanor. My profession is who I am. Without it, I'm nothing." In the following months, Michael plunged into deep depression. He permanently stepped away from the hospital, claiming health issues without specifying the diagnosis. He spent his days at home, refusing to go out, refusing to see friends, refusing even to have dinner with the family. The tremors worsened, first the hands, then the arms, then the legs. Simple tasks like brushing teeth or buttoning a shirt became epic battles. Each day was a new humiliation, a new loss of independence. Elena tried everything to pull him out of depression. She suggested therapy, support groups, travel. Michael rejected everything. "What's the point?" he would say bitterly. "What's the point of anything? I'm dying slowly, Elena. Let me die in peace." "You're not dying, you're alive, but you're choosing not to live." "And what's the difference?" The tension at home became unbearable. Carlos and Sofia, who had previously been happy and outgoing teenagers, became quiet and withdrawn. They didn't fully understand what was happening to their father, only that the cheerful and confident man they knew had been replaced by a bitter and defeated stranger. It was Sofia who finally forced the conversation that would change everything. One December night, she knocked on the office door where Michael spent most of his time, isolated from the world. "Dad, can I come in?" "I'm busy, Princess." "Busy with what? You haven't done anything for months." The teenager's brutal honesty hit him like a slap. She entered without waiting for permission, sitting in the chair across from his desk. "Dad, what's happening to you?" Michael looked at his daughter, this beautiful and intelligent girl who looked so much like Elena. She deserved honesty. "I'm sick, Sofia. Very sick." "Sick? How?" "I have a disease called Parkinson's. It means my body will gradually stop working properly." Sofia processed this information with the seriousness of someone much older. "Are you going to die?" "Not immediately, but I'll get very sick." "And is that why you lock yourself in here? Is that why you don't talk to us anymore? Is that why Mum cries every night?" Michael was startled. "Your mother cries." "Every night, Dad. She thinks we don't hear, but Carlos and I know. She's destroyed. We all are." Michael felt a stab of guilt. In his self-pity, he had forgotten that his family was also suffering. "Sofia, Dad, remember when I was 7 and broke my arm riding my bike?" "I remember. You told me that when we're hurt, we have two choices. We can let the pain define us, or we can use the pain to make us stronger." Michael's own words echoed back to him through his daughter's innocent wisdom. "Joyce, you're letting your disease define you," Sofia continued. "You're not my father anymore. You're just a sick and sad man." Michael began to cry, the first tears he had shed since the diagnosis. "I don't know how to be strong with this, Princess. I don't know how to be your father when I can barely take care of myself." Sofia stood up and went to him, placing her small hands over his trembling hands. "You don't need to be perfect to be my father." You just need to be present. That night, for the first time in months, Michael had dinner with his family. It was difficult. He needed help cutting meat, spilled soup on his shirt, knocked over his water glass, but he was there, trying. "Dad," Carlos said during dessert, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Your disease? Is it contagious?" "No, son." "Why?" "Because I wanted to hug you. I haven't hugged you in months." Michael began to cry again, opening his arms to his children. It was a strange and unbalanced hug. His arms trembled, he was weak, but it was real. "I missed you guys," he whispered. "We missed you too," Elena said, joining the family embrace. In the following days, Michael slowly began to engage with life again. He started researching Parkinson's, reading studies, understanding his condition. The doctor in him awakened again, even though the surgeon was retired. During his research, he discovered something that shocked him. The quality of care for Parkinson's patients was absolutely inadequate. There were few specialists, enormous waiting lists, outdated treatments. Patients like him were being poorly served by the medical system. "Elena," he said one morning during breakfast, "I want to do something." "What?" "I want to start a clinic specialized in Parkinson's. Not to operate, I can't do that anymore, but to coordinate care, educate patients, improve treatments." Elena looked at him cautiously. "Michael, are you sure? You're barely managing your own condition." "Maybe that's exactly why I need to do this. Who better to help other Parkinson's patients than someone who lives with the disease? But what if you can't do it? What if the disease gets worse?" Michael took Elena's hand, his fingers still trembling but his voice firm. "Then at least I'll have tried to do something useful with the time I have." The next months were the most challenging and rewarding of Michael's life. With Elena's help, he began developing the plan for the Hope Clinic for Parkinson's. He used his savings, sold investments, mortgaged the house. "Are you sure about this?" Eleanor asked when they signed the mortgage papers. "More sure than I've been about anything in months." But the path wasn't easy. Finding funding was a battle. Many investors hesitated to support a clinic run by someone with the same disease they intended to treat. "Dr. Rodriguez," said one of the potential investors during a presentation, "with all due respect, how do we know you'll be capable of running a clinic as your condition progresses?" Michael stood slowly, his hands visibly trembling as he held his notes. "Mr. Martinez, you're right to question my capability. I shake. Sometimes it takes me 5 minutes to button a shirt. I need help cutting my food." The silence in the room was palpable. "Yeah, but exactly because of this. I understand what my patients go through in a way no healthy doctor can understand. I know what it's like to wake up every morning facing a body that doesn't obey. I know what it's like to lose your professional identity. I know what it's like to be afraid of the future." He paused, meeting the eyes of each person in the room. "And I know what it's like to find hope when everything seems lost. I know what it's like to transform personal tragedy into purpose. That, gentlemen, isn't something you learn in medical school." The presentation worked. The Christian Healthcare Foundation group decided to fund the clinic with a donation of $1.5 million. "Dr. Rodriguez," said Pastor David Chen, president of the foundation, "your passion is contagious. We want to support not just a clinic, but a vision of transforming suffering into service." 6 months later, the Hope Clinic opened its doors in a modest building in Houston's medical center. Michael had hired a team of neurologists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, and counselors. But what made the clinic unique was that half the staff also lived with Parkinson's or other neurological diseases. "If we're going to treat patients with neurological conditions," Michael explained to his team during the first meeting, "we need people who understand these conditions from personal experience." Sarah Martinez, a former nurse who had developed Parkinson's at age 50, was hired as care coordinator. Robert Johnson, a former engineer with multiple sclerosis, became the assistive technology specialist. "Dr. Rodriguez," Sarah said, "this approach is revolutionary. I've never seen a clinic where caregivers truly understand what patients experience. That's because most clinics are run by healthy people who pity the sick," Michael replied. "We don't pity, we understand." Michael's first patient was Margaret Thompson, a retired 73-year-old teacher who had been diagnosed with Parkinson's 2 years earlier. "Dr. Rodriguez," and she said during the initial consultation, "I must admit I'm nervous about being treated by a doctor who has the same disease I do." "Why?" "Because, well, if you can't cure yourself, how can you cure me?" Michael smiled. "Mrs. Thompson, can I show you something?" He stood up and walked to his office window, his movements clearly affected by the muscle rigidity characteristic of Parkinson's. "See how I walk? See how my hands shake?" "Yes. A year ago, I was in a mental wheelchair. I was depressed, isolated, convinced my life was over." He turned to her. "Today, I'm running a clinic that will help hundreds of people like us. I haven't cured my Parkinson's, but I've cured my attitude toward Parkinson's. And does that make a difference? Mrs. Thompson, the difference between a good life and a miserable life with Parkinson's isn't in the absence of symptoms. It's in the presence of purpose." Margaret began to cry. "I feel like my life is over." "Your old life is over, but a new life can begin. A life where you're not defined by your disease, but by what you choose to do despite the disease." In the following months, Margaret's transformation was remarkable. She became a volunteer at the clinic, led support groups, and even returned to teaching, now teaching other people with Parkinson's about how to adapt their lives to their new limitations. "Dr. Rodriguez," she said in one of her follow-up appointments, "you gave me back my life." "No, Mrs. Thompson. You chose to reclaim your life. I just showed you it was possible." 2 years later, the Hope Clinic had become a national model. Researchers from across the country came to study its innovative practices. The depression rate among its patients was 70% lower than the national average. The reported quality of life was significantly higher. Michael had become a nationally recognized figure in the Parkinson's community. He gave lectures, wrote articles, appeared on TV programs, but what made him proudest wasn't the recognition, it was the transformed lives. Like Frank Morrison, a former police officer who had considered suicide after being diagnosed with Parkinson's. "Dr. Rodriguez," Frank said during a group therapy session, "when I came here 6 months ago, I was planning to kill myself. I couldn't imagine living as an invalid. And now I understand that invalid is a mental state, not physical. My body changed, but my ability to contribute, to love, to matter, that didn't change." Frank had become a mentor to other newly diagnosed men, helping them navigate the psychological aspects of the disease. Or like Isabella Garcia, a 35-year-old young mother diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's. "Doctor," she had said crying in the first consultation, "how am I going to raise my children like this? How am I going to be a good mother when I can't even hold a pen?" 6 months later, Isabella was leading a program at the clinic for young parents with Parkinson's, teaching them to adapt parenting techniques to their physical limitations. "I discovered that being a good mother has nothing to do with having steady hands," she said during one of the sessions. "It has to do with having a steady heart." But perhaps the most significant transformation was in Michael's own family. Carlos and Sophia, now in their senior year of high school, had grown up seeing their father transform tragedy into triumph. "Dad," Sophia said one night during dinner, "I've decided what I want to study in college." "What?" "Neuroscience. I want to research treatments for Parkinson's." "And I," Carlos added, "want to study health administration. I want to help expand clinics like yours." Michael looked at his children. These extraordinary young people who had learned through his struggle that adversity could be transformed into opportunity. "Are you sure? You don't need to choose careers because of me." "It's not because of you, Dad," Sophia said. "It's because of what you taught us. That when life knocks you down, you can choose to stay down or you can choose to build something from the rubble." Eleanor, who had become co-administrative director of the clinic, held Michael's hand. "Do you know what the most incredible part of this whole journey is?" she said. "What?" "When you were a surgeon, you saved one life at a time. Now, you're saving hundreds of lives at a time. I'm not saving anyone. I'm just showing that it's possible to live well with Parkinson's. That is saving lives, Michael. You're saving people from despair, isolation, depression. You're saving entire families. 3 years after opening the clinic, Michael was invited to speak at the National Parkinson's Convention. It was the largest event of its kind in the country, with thousands of patients, families, and medical professionals present. Getting on stage was a challenge. Michael needed help walking up the steps. His movements were visibly affected by the disease's progression, but when he reached the microphone, his voice was firm and clear. "My name is Dr. Michael Rodriguez," he began. "5 years ago, I was a neurosurgeon at the peak of my career. Today, I can barely tie my own shoes." The audience fell completely silent. "5 years ago, I thought Parkinson's was a death sentence. Today, I know it's a chance at life." He paused, letting the words settle. "When I was diagnosed, my first reaction was anger. Why me? Why now? Why my family? I questioned God, questioned justice, questioned the meaning of everything." Michael looked around the packed auditorium, seeing faces of people who understood exactly what he had gone through. "But there's a verse in the Bible that changed my perspective. It's in 2 Corinthians 1:3-4. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our tribulation, that we also may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble, with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God." He leaned on the podium, supporting himself to compensate for his instability. In other words, God allows us to go through difficulties not to destroy us, but to enable us to help others who will go through the same difficulties. Parkinson's wasn't given to me to punish me. It was given to prepare me to understand, to have empathy, to serve in a way I never could if I had remained healthy. The audience began to applaud, but Michael raised his trembling hand to silence them. "I want to leave you with a challenge. Each of us here has a choice to make. We can let Parkinson's define us, or we can define how we're going to live with Parkinson's. We can isolate ourselves in our pain, or we can connect through our pain. We can see our disease as the end of our story, or as the beginning of a new chapter." His voice rose, charged with passion and conviction. "I choose to see my Parkinson's not as my weakness, but as my strength, not as my limitation, but as my liberation." Liberation from a life focused only on myself to a life focused on serving others. The auditorium exploded in applause that lasted 5 minutes. People were crying, hugging each other, some in wheelchairs straining to applaud with trembling hands. After the speech, Michael was approached by dozens of people, patients wanting help, doctors interested in replicating the Hope Clinic model, researchers proposing collaborations. But the conversation that most touched his heart was with a 28-year-old named David. "Dr. Rodriguez," David said, his hands visibly trembling. "I was diagnosed 3 months ago. I'm terrified. I have a pregnant wife, a career I'm losing, dreams that seem impossible now." Michael placed his trembling hands over David's trembling hands. "David, can I tell you something that took me 3 years to learn? Please, Parkinson's doesn't kill dreams. It just forces you to dream differently. Your dreams haven't ended, they're evolving. How can I believe that? Because 5 years ago, my dream was to be the best neurosurgeon in the world. Today, my dream is to help people like you discover they can still have extraordinary lives. And this second dream is infinitely more rewarding than the first." David began to cry. "Thank you. I needed to hear that. David, promise me something." "What?" "Promise that when you're ready, not today, not tomorrow, but when you're ready, you'll find a way to transform your pain into purpose. You'll find a way to use your experience with Parkinson's to help others. I promise." 2 years later, David had founded a non-profit organization that offered financial support to young families dealing with Parkinson's. He had transformed his personal tragedy into a life mission. 5 years after his diagnosis, Michael was on stage again, this time for the opening of the 5th Hope Clinic, this time in Dallas. His condition had progressed significantly. He now used a cane. His speech had slowed, and he needed much more assistance for daily activities. But his determination remained unshakable. 5 years ago, he said to the audience, "My biggest concern was whether I could tie my shoes. Today, my biggest concern is whether we can open clinics fast enough to serve all the people who need our help. The Hope Clinic network had treated over 2,000 patients. The depression rate among their patients was the lowest recorded nationally. More importantly, they had become community centers, places where people with neurological diseases weren't patients, but active participants in their own healing. After the ceremony, Michael was in a wheelchair in the parking lot. He had accepted the wheelchair 6 months ago when walking became too unstable. When an elderly woman approached, "Dr. Rodriguez?" He turned and saw a grey-haired lady with tears in her eyes. "I'm Betty Williams. My husband Tom was one of your first patients 4 years ago." Michael remembered Tom, a 68-year-old man who had arrived at the clinic in deep depression, convinced his life was over. "How is Tom?" "Doctor, he died 6 months ago." Michael felt his heart tighten. "Betty, I'm sorry." "No, doctor, let me finish. Tom died, but he didn't die as a defeated man. He died as a man who had found purpose again." She knelt beside his wheelchair. "The last 4 years of his life, after meeting you and your clinic, were the best years of our 45-year marriage. He had found peace, purpose, joy. He helped dozens of other men deal with Parkinson's." "Betty." "Doctor, you didn't just save my husband's life. You saved our marriage, our family, our hope. Until his last days, Tom said you had given him the greatest gift possible." "What gift?" "You taught him that a life can have value even when the body fails. That contribution doesn't require physical perfection. That love and service are possible even, especially when we face our greatest difficulties." Michael began to cry. "Thank you for telling me this." "No, doctor. Thank you for giving my husband and all of us the chance to transform suffering into service." That night at home, Michael was in bed with Elena beside him. His movements were more limited now, but his mind remained sharp. "Elena, can I ask you a question?" "Of course. Do you regret it? Staying with me, going through all this?" Elena turned to look at him directly. "Michael, remember when we got married and promised in sickness and in health?" "I remember. I thought I understood what that meant. I thought it meant taking care of you if you got the flu or broke your leg." She took his trembling hand. "But I didn't really understand until we lived it. In sickness doesn't just mean taking care of someone's body. It means witnessing their soul transform. It means seeing someone you love find purpose in suffering. Even when I'm a burden. Michael Rodriguez, you listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you." Her voice was firm, almost angry. "You have never been a burden. You have been my inspiration." "How can I be inspiration when I need help getting dressed?" "Because you taught me that strength has nothing to do with physical ability. Because you showed me that purpose can be born from loss. Because you transformed our family from people who had a comfortable life to people who have a meaningful life." Eleanor lay closer to him. "The last 5 years have been the hardest of our lives, but they've also been the most important, because we saw what's possible when we choose to grow through pain instead of being defeated by it. What about the children? How has this affected Carlos and Sophia?" "Are you serious?" "Michael, our children became the most compassionate and determined people I know. They saw their father face the impossible and build something beautiful from it. Didn't they feel they lost the father they knew? They gained an even better father. The father they had before was successful. The father they have now is meaningful." The next day, Michael received a call that would change everything again. "Dr. Rodriguez, this is Dr. Patricia Williams from Johns Hopkins. We're developing an experimental treatment for Parkinson's that could revolutionize how we treat the disease." Michael was immediately interested. "What kind of treatment?" "Gene therapy combined with cutting-edge deep brain stimulation. We're looking for candidates for our clinical study. And we'd like you to consider participating. Your symptoms are at the ideal stage for experimental treatment." Michael was silent for a moment. "What's the success rate?" "It's experimental, so we don't have definitive data. But in initial tests, 60% of patients showed significant improvement in symptoms. And the risks? Substantial. It's experimental brain surgery. There are risks of serious complications, including..." Well, including death. Michael thought about this for days. The chance to recover some of his abilities was tempting, but there was also the possibility of losing everything. "What do you think?" he asked Elena during one of their nightly walks. Now she pushed his wheelchair through the neighborhood while they talked. "I think you have to decide if you want to risk the life you have for the chance to have the life you lost. And what's your opinion?" Elena stopped pushing the chair and came to kneel in front of him. "Michael, the life you lost was that of a brilliant surgeon who saved lives in the hospital. The life you have now is that of a visionary who is transforming how the world treats neurological diseases. But what if the treatment worked? What if I could recover movement, coordination? Then you'd be incredible. But you're already incredible. The question is, are you willing to risk all the good you can still do for the chance to recover abilities you may never need again?" It's a difficult decision. It is, and it's yours to make. Michael spent weeks thinking. He consulted other doctors, talked with Carlos and Sophia, prayed for guidance. Finally, he made his decision. "Dr. Williams, thank you for the opportunity, but I'm going to decline." "May I ask why?" "Because I discovered that sometimes the greatest courage isn't risking everything to recover what you lost, but fully accepting what you have and making the best possible use of it." "I understand. Besides, I'm more useful to the Parkinson's community as someone who lives with the disease than as someone who was cured of it." 2 months later, Michael received a call that moved him deeply. "Dr. Rodriguez, this is David Martinez." Michael immediately remembered the 28-year-old he had met at the convention 5 years earlier. "David, how are you?" "Good, actually. Doctor, I'm calling because I want to tell you something incredible." "What?" "My non-profit organization just received a $10 million donation to expand nationally. We'll be able to help thousands of young families dealing with Parkinson's." "David, that's wonderful. But the best part is who made the donation." "Who?" "A woman named Margaret Thompson. She said you changed her life, and now she wants to change the lives of others." Michael remembered Margaret, his first patient at the clinic, the retired teacher who had arrived desperate and transformed into a powerful advocate for the Parkinson's community. "Doctor," David continued, "without you, none of this would have been possible. You taught me to transform my tragedy into purpose. Margaret taught that to others. Now she's investing her entire inheritance to ensure others can make the same transformation." "David, that's incredible. And there's more. We're naming our new national program in your honor. It's going to be called the Rodriguez Initiative, Transforming Tragedy into Purpose." Michael began to cry. In 5 years, he had gone from a broken and defeated man to someone whose name would be associated with hope and transformation. "Thank you, David. That means more than you can imagine." "No, Doctor. Thank you for teaching me that the end of a life isn't the end of life." That night, Michael was in his home office, working on his new project, a book about transforming medical adversity into service opportunity. His typing was slow due to tremors, but he persisted. Sophia, now in her second year of neuroscience program, entered to say goodnight. "What are you working on, Dad?" "The chapter about finding purpose in pain." "Can I read it?" Michael turned his chair so she could see the screen. Sophia read in silence for a few minutes. "Dad, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When I was younger, I used to be proud of having a father who was a famous surgeon. My friends were impressed. And now? Now I'm proud of having a father who took the worst thing that could happen to him and transformed it into the best thing that could happen to thousands of other people. Sophia, you understand my disease will get worse, that I'll need more and more care." "I understand. And that doesn't scare you?" Sophia thought carefully before answering. "It scares me to eventually lose you, but it doesn't scare me to take care of you. Because you taught me that taking care of someone we love isn't a burden, it's a privilege." "How did I learn that?" "By watching how you take care of your patient community, by seeing how you transformed vulnerability into strength, by seeing how you made your disease a bridge to connect with others, instead of a wall to isolate yourself." Michael hugged his daughter, his tears wetting her hair. "I'm so proud of the woman you're becoming. I learned from the best. 6 months later, Michael was giving his last public lecture. His condition had progressed to the point where public speaking was becoming very difficult. But he had promised to give the keynote address at the graduation of the first class of doctors specialized in Parkinson's from the University of Texas, a program that had been created inspired by his work. Getting on stage required 2 people to help him. His speech was slower, his words sometimes slurred, but his message was crystal clear. "Future doctors," he began, "you're entering a profession where you'll witness suffering every day. You'll see diseases you can't cure, pain you can't completely eliminate, loss you can't prevent." He paused, gathering strength. "But you'll also witness something miraculous. You'll see the human capacity to find beauty in adversity. You'll see people transform their greatest weaknesses into their greatest strengths. Some of you may think that medicine's goal is to eliminate suffering, but there's an even greater goal, helping people find meaning in their suffering." His voice rose with passion, even though the words came out with difficulty. "When we can't cure the body, we can still cure the spirit. When we can't restore function, we can still restore hope. When we can't eliminate disease, we can still eliminate despair." He looked directly at the audience of young doctors. "Remember, you're not just doctors. You're agents of transformation. You have the power to help people rewrite their stories, even when the current chapter is painful. And if one day you yourselves face medical adversity, and many of you will, remember that this isn't the end of your ability to contribute. It could be the beginning of an even deeper way of serving." The auditorium stood in an ovation that lasted 10 minutes. Many of the future doctors were crying. After the ceremony, Michael was approached by Dr. Jennifer Chen, one of the graduates. "Dr. Rodriguez, thank you for that message, but can I confess something?" "Of course. When I learned that a doctor with Parkinson's would give our graduation speech, I was worried. I thought it would be depressing. And was it? It was the opposite. It was the most hopeful speech I've ever heard, because it showed me that even when everything goes wrong in my medical career, I can still make a difference." "Dr. Chen, can I give you some advice? Please. Don't wait until something goes wrong to find your deeper purpose. Start now seeing each patient not just as a medical problem to be solved, but as a person seeking meaning in their experience." "How do I do that?" "By remembering that you're not just treating diseases, you're witnessing human journeys. And sometimes, the deepest healing you can offer is simply recognizing someone's courage in facing the impossible." 2 years later, Dr. Jennifer Chen had become one of Dallas's most sought-after neurologists, known not only for her technical competence, but for her ability to help patients find hope in difficult diagnoses. And she wasn't the only one. The Rodriguez generation of doctors, trained in programs inspired by Michael's work, was transforming how medicine approached chronic diseases across the country. Michael now needed full-time care. Elena had become his primary caregiver, helped by specialized nurses. His speech was severely impaired, his movements very limited, but his mind remained brilliant, and he continued to guide the Hope Clinic network through adaptive technology. On a spring morning, 10 years after his diagnosis, Michael woke to find his entire family gathered around his bed. Elena, Carlos, and Sophia, now both graduated and working in healthcare, and his 2 small grandchildren. "What's happening?" he managed to articulate with difficulty. "Dad," Sophia said, tears in her eyes, "we have a surprise for you." Carlos opened his laptop and turned the screen so Michael could see. It was an article in the New England Journal of Medicine titled "The Rodriguez Model: How Doctors with Chronic Diseases Are Revolutionizing Patient Care." "Dad," Carlos said, "your approach of including healthcare professionals who live with the same conditions they treat is being adopted internationally. There are now more than 50 clinics using the Rodriguez model in 12 countries. And there's more," Elena added. "The World Health Organization is creating guidelines based on your work." Michael tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, tears of gratitude streamed down his face. Sophia took his hand. "Dad, do you want to know what the most incredible part of all this is?" He nodded weakly. "Each of these 50 clinics has a plaque at the entrance. They all say the same thing, in honor of Dr. Michael Rodriguez, who taught us that our greatest weakness can become our greatest strength. And below, Carlos continued, is the verse you always quoted, 2 Corinthians 1:3-4. God comforts us in all our tribulation, so that we may also comfort those who are in any tribulation. Michael closed his eyes, feeling a deep peace settle over him. In 10 years, he had gone from a man broken by disease to a man whose brokenness had become the foundation for healing thousands of others. Elena leaned in and whispered in his ear, "Michael, do you know what your greatest legacy is?" He opened his eyes and looked at her questioningly. "It's not the clinics, it's not the patients you helped, it's not even the change you brought to medicine." "What is it then?" he managed to whisper. "You proved that it's possible to transform any tragedy into triumph, that it's possible to find purpose in any pain, that it's possible to serve others even when you yourself need to be served." She kissed his forehead. "You took the worst thing that could happen to a surgeon and transformed it into the best thing that could happen to thousands of patients." That afternoon, Michael was in his adapted office, using eye-tracking technology to write. It was slow and tiring, but he was determined to finish his book. His final entry was a chapter titled Impossible Gratitude. 10 years ago, if someone had told me I would one day be grateful for Parkinson's, I would have thought they were crazy. Today, however contradictory it may seem, I am genuinely grateful for this disease. I'm not grateful for the pain, the limitations, the losses. I'm grateful for the transformation the disease forced in my life. I'm grateful for being broken in a way that allowed me to be rebuilt with a greater purpose. As a surgeon, I saved lives by operating on brains. As a Parkinson's advocate, I save lives by healing hearts, showing people they can still have value, purpose, and joy even when their bodies fail. If I could go back in time and choose not to have Parkinson's, I would choose to have the disease, because the person I became through this journey is infinitely more valuable than the person I was before it. My message to anyone facing medical adversity is simple. Your disease is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of a chapter that could be more meaningful than anything that came before. God allows us to go through difficulties not to punish us, but to prepare us to serve, to understand, to comfort others who will go through similar difficulties. Your greatest weakness can become your greatest strength. Your greatest loss can become your greatest contribution. Your greatest pain can become your greatest purpose. Don't waste your suffering. Transform it into service. And discover that sometimes the deepest blessings come disguised as the greatest tragedies. Michael finished typing and closed his eyes, exhausted but at peace. In 10 years, he had gone from victim to victor, from patient to inspiration, from broken man to symbol of hope for thousands. And as the sun set through his office window, Michael Rodriguez smiled, knowing that his life, all of it, including the most painful parts, had been worth it, because he had learned the deepest truth of all, that meaning doesn't come from what happens to us, but from what we choose to do with what happens to us. And that choice always remains in our hands.